Imagine this. You're standing at a networking event. Or maybe you're waiting in line at a coffee shop. A friendly person smiles at you and says, "Hi, how's your day going?" It's such a simple question. You know every single word. You understand exactly what they mean. But somehow, your brain goes silent. You smile politely. You answer, "Good." Then, nothing. An awkward silence fills the space between both of you. You want to continue the conversation. You really do. But you have absolutely no idea what to say next. Has that ever happened to you? If it has, you're not alone. In fact, this is one of the biggest problems English learners face. Not grammar. Not pronunciation. Not vocabulary. Conversation. Because learning English from books teaches you how to make sentences. But life doesn't happen in textbooks. Real conversations don't come with multiple choice answers. They move quickly. They change naturally. And they often begin with something called small talk. Now, many people think small talk is meaningless. They think it's just talking about the weather or asking, "How are you?" But small talk isn't about exchanging information. It's about building comfort. Think about it. When you meet someone for the first time, you don't immediately ask, "So, what's your biggest fear in life?" Or, "How much money do you earn?" That would feel strange. Instead, you begin with something light. Something easy. Something that says, "I'd like to get to know you." That's exactly what small talk is. It's the bridge between strangers and friends. And once you learn how to cross that bridge, English conversations become much easier. Let me tell you a story. A young software engineer moved to New York for his first international job. Technically, his English was excellent. He could write emails. He could understand meetings. He could explain complex technical problems. But every morning, he entered the office kitchen, made his coffee, and stood there silently. His co-workers chatted naturally. They laughed. They shared stories. They talked about sports, movies, weekend plans, and funny things that happened on the way to work. He wanted to join them. But every time he tried, his mind asked the same question. What should I say? So he stayed quiet. Weeks passed. He became known as the quiet guy. Not because he lacked intelligence. Not because his English was poor. But because he never learned the simple skill of starting conversations. One afternoon, an older coworker noticed this. Instead of waiting for him to speak, she smiled and asked, "So, what's the best food you've tried since moving here?" He smiled immediately. "Oh, that's easy. I tried New York pizza last weekend." She laughed. "Everyone says that. Was it really that good?" "It was amazing," he replied. "What about you?" That conversation lasted nearly 15 minutes. Do you know what made it different? It wasn't grammar. It wasn't vocabulary. It was one simple question that invited a story instead of a one-word answer. And that's exactly what you're going to learn today. Because the secret to small talk isn't knowing thousands of English words. It's knowing how to keep curiosity alive. Here's the first mistake most learners make. Someone asks, "How are you?" They answer, "I'm fine." Conversation over. Now listen to this instead. "I'm doing well. I had a really busy morning, but I'm excited for the weekend. How about you? Did you notice what happened?" The answer became an invitation. Instead of closing the conversation, it opened another door. That's what fluent speakers do naturally. They don't just answer. They give people something to respond to. Let's practice together. Suppose someone asks, "Did you have a good weekend?" Instead of saying, "Yes." Try this. "Yes, I did. I went hiking with a couple of friends, and the weather was perfect." Have you ever been hiking? See how natural that feels? You answered. You added a detail. Then you asked a question. That's the rhythm of a real conversation. And here's something important to remember. People love talking about themselves. Not because they're selfish. Because it's the one topic they know best. So if you want to become an excellent conversationalist, become genuinely interested in other people. Ask questions like, what kind of music do you enjoy? What do you usually do on weekends? Have you watched any good movies lately? What's the best place you've ever traveled to? None of these questions are difficult, but each one can lead to a conversation that lasts 20 minutes instead of 20 seconds. Now imagine you're sitting next to someone on a plane. The flight lasts 3 hours. You both smile politely. Someone has to speak first. Most people wait. Confident speakers don't. They notice something around them and say, "This is my first time flying with this airline." Or, "I can't believe how busy the airport was today." Simple observations often become great conversations. Because conversations don't always begin with questions. Sometimes, they begin with curiosity. Think about the last great conversation you had. Was it carefully planned? Probably not. It started with something simple. A question. An observation. A joke. A shared experience. Then, one sentence naturally led to another. That's how conversations grow. Not through perfection, but through connection. Now let me show you one of the easiest conversation formulas you'll ever learn. I call it, notice, comment, question. Imagine you're waiting in a coffee shop. You notice someone reading a book. You could simply smile and say, "That looks like an interesting book." That's your comment. Then ask, "Have you read anything else by that author?" Just like that, a conversation has begun. Here's another example. You're attending a conference. Someone is wearing a company badge. You say, "So, is this your first time at this event?" Simple, friendly, natural. Or maybe you're in an English class. Before the lesson begins, you turn to the person beside you and ask, "How long have you been learning English?" That's it. You don't need a perfect opening line. You just need a reason to begin. Now let's imagine you're talking to someone you've just met. They say, "I'm from Canada." Many learners reply, "Oh, nice." Conversation finished. Instead, be curious. "Oh, that's interesting. Which part of Canada are you from?" They answer, "Toronto." Now continue. "I've heard it's a beautiful city. What's your favorite thing about living there?" Notice something? Every answer creates another opportunity to ask a question. That's how fluent speakers keep conversations moving. They listen carefully. Then they become curious. Curiosity is one of the most powerful communication skills you can develop. Let's practice. I'll say something. You think of a follow-up question. Ready? "I recently started learning to cook." What would you ask? Maybe, "What made you decide to start?" Or, "What's your favorite dish to cook?" Excellent. Another one. "I've always wanted to visit Italy." Your question could be, "What attracts you most about Italy?" Or, "Which city would you visit first?" See how easy it becomes. You're no longer worried about what you should say. You're helping the other person tell their story. And that's what people remember. They don't remember the smartest person in the room. They remember the person who made them feel interesting. Now here's another secret. Don't be afraid to share small stories about yourself. Imagine someone asks, "Do you like coffee?" Instead of answering, "Yes. Try this." "Yes, I love coffee. In fact, I started drinking it during college because I needed something to help me stay awake while studying." That's a story. It's short. It's personal. And it gives the other person something to respond to. They might say, "Really? I actually prefer tea." Now you're comparing drinks. Then maybe someone mentions their favorite cafe. Then another person recommends a place. Suddenly, you're having a real conversation. Let's talk about another fear. Running out of things to say. This happens when you think conversations are about giving perfect answers. They're not. Conversations are about exploring ideas together. Imagine someone asks, "What's your favorite season?" Instead of answering, "Winter." Expand it. "Winter is my favorite season because I enjoy cool weather. I like wearing jackets, drinking hot coffee, and going for long walks when it's not too hot outside." Then ask, "What about you?" Now the conversation continues naturally. Here's a challenge. From today, never answer an English question with only one sentence. Always aim for at least 3. For example, question, "What do you do?" Instead of saying, "I'm a student," say, "I'm an information technology student." I really enjoy learning about software development, and lately I've also been spending a lot of time improving my English because I want to communicate confidently with people from different countries. 3 sentences. 1 answer. Much more interesting. Now let's talk about something called active listening. Most people think conversations are about speaking. Actually, they're about listening. Imagine you're so busy thinking about your next sentence, that you completely miss what the other person just said. That happens to many English learners. Instead, focus completely on the speaker. Listen for keywords. If someone says, "I went hiking last weekend," your brain immediately notices the word hiking. Now ask about that. How long was the hike? Was it difficult? Do you hike often? Because you were listening, you never run out of things to say. The conversation itself gives you the next question. That's one of the biggest secrets fluent speakers know. They don't invent conversations. They follow them. Now imagine you're talking to someone at work. It's Monday morning. Instead of sitting quietly, you smile and ask, "Did you do anything fun over the weekend?" It's a simple question, but almost everyone has an answer. Maybe they visited family. Maybe they watched a movie. Maybe they relaxed at home. No matter what they say, there's always another question waiting. What movie did you watch? Where did you go? How was it? One question becomes another. That's how conversations grow without effort. Here's another powerful habit. Remember small details. Suppose someone tells you on Tuesday, "I'm taking an exam on Friday." Then, the following Monday, you ask, "Hey, how did your exam go?" That one question shows something important. You were listening. People appreciate that. Strong conversations aren't built on clever vocabulary. They're built on genuine interest. Now let's imagine you're meeting a friend after a long time. Instead of saying, "Hi," and waiting, try, "It's been a while. What have you been up to lately?" That's an open question. It invites a story. And stories create conversations. Remember, your goal isn't to impress people with perfect English. Your goal is to make them enjoy talking with you. And the easiest way to do that is to be curious. Now, I want you to imagine something. You're at an international conference. People from different countries are standing around, talking in small groups. You don't know anyone. For a moment, that familiar voice appears in your mind. What if I say something wrong? What if they don't understand me? What if the conversation becomes awkward? Then you notice something. Everyone else is just talking. Nobody is giving perfect speeches. Nobody is using complicated vocabulary. They're smiling. They're asking questions. They're laughing. They're simply enjoying the conversation. That's when you realize something important. The goal of a conversation is not to prove how intelligent you are. The goal is to connect. Once you understand that, everything changes. Let me share another secret that excellent conversationalists use. They pay attention to emotions. Suppose someone says, "I finally got my dream job." You could simply reply, "That's nice." Or, you could say, "Congratulations. You must be really excited." Notice the difference. You didn't respond only to the information. You responded to the emotion. Here's another example. Someone says, "My flight was delayed for 6 hours." Instead of saying, "Oh," you say, "That sounds exhausting. What did you do while you were waiting?" People remember those responses because they feel understood. Conversation isn't only about facts. It's about feelings. Now let's practice something fun. Imagine someone asks, "If you could have dinner with anyone in the world, who would it be?" Don't rush. Think for a moment. Maybe you'd choose a famous entrepreneur. Maybe a scientist. Maybe an actor. Maybe someone in your family. Now explain why. Then ask the same question back. That's another simple technique. Whenever someone asks you an interesting question, answer it, then return it. It's one of the easiest ways to keep conversations alive. Now let's talk about humor. Many English learners think they have to become funny. You don't. You only need to smile. A friendly smile makes even simple conversations more enjoyable. Imagine someone accidentally drops their pen. You hand it back and smile. They say, "Thanks." You reply. No problem. It looks like your pen wanted to escape. It's a tiny joke. Nothing complicated. But it makes the moment memorable. Humor doesn't need to be perfect. It only needs to feel natural. Now imagine you're sitting next to someone on a train. For the first few minutes, both of you look out the window. Silence. Then it starts raining. You smile and say, "Looks like we picked an interesting day to travel." That's all. A simple observation. They might smile and reply, "Yeah, I forgot my umbrella too." Now you have a conversation. Notice how often conversations begin with the environment around you. The weather, the event, the food, the music, the location. You don't always need a personal question. Sometimes you simply talk about what's happening right now. Let's do another exercise. I'll give you a situation. You think of one sentence that could start a conversation. You're waiting in line at a cafe. What could you say? Maybe, "This place is always busy." Or, "I've heard their coffee is really good." Now imagine you're waiting before an English class begins. You might say, "Have you taken classes here before?" Or, "How long have you been learning English?" See? Simple, natural, friendly. Now let's discuss something that many learners forget. Not every conversation has to be long. Sometimes, a 2-minute conversation is enough. Maybe you talk to the cashier. Maybe you greet a neighbor. Maybe you ask someone for directions. Those small conversations matter. Because every conversation strengthens your confidence. Imagine learning to play the piano. Would you only practice once a month? Of course not. You'd practice a little every day. English conversations work the same way. Small daily conversations are more valuable than one long conversation every few months. Now I want to challenge the way you think. Stop calling it small talk. Instead, call it starting talk. Because that's exactly what it is. It's not the goal. It's the beginning. A conversation about the weather might become a conversation about travel. A conversation about coffee might become a conversation about culture. A conversation about work might become a lasting friendship. You never know where one simple sentence can lead. Here's another habit to build. Whenever someone shares something, find one thing you genuinely relate to. Imagine they say, "I love watching documentaries." You could reply, "Me too. I recently watched one about space exploration." Now you've added your experience. They respond. You respond again. The conversation flows naturally because both people are contributing. That's called balance. Good conversations aren't interviews. They're not speeches either. They're shared experiences. Let's imagine another real-life situation. You're meeting an English-speaking friend for lunch. They ask, "So, what's new?" Instead of saying, "Nothing," think about your week. Maybe you started reading a new book. Maybe you learned a new skill. Maybe you watched an interesting movie. Maybe you cooked something for the first time. There's almost always something worth sharing. Interesting conversations come from noticing the interesting moments in your own life. Now here's something I want you to remember forever. You don't need to become a different person to become a better English speaker. You don't need a different personality. You don't need to be naturally outgoing. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room. You simply need to become more comfortable sharing the person you already are. Because the most interesting thing you can talk about is your own life. Your experiences. Your dreams. Your mistakes. Your lessons. Your curiosity. Those things are unique. Nobody else has your story. And that's exactly why people will enjoy talking with you. Now, let's do something different. For the next few minutes, I want you to stop watching. I want you to participate. Because English isn't a sport you watch. It's a skill you use. So imagine I'm sitting across from you in a coffee shop. We're having our very first conversation. I'll ask you questions. Your job is to answer them out loud. Not in your head. Out loud. Ready? Let's begin. What's one thing that made you smile today? Take a few seconds. Answer. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about pronunciation. Just speak. Now let me ask another one. If you had one extra free day every week, how would you spend it? Keep talking. Explain your answer. Give examples. Share a story. Now another. What's something you've always wanted to learn? Maybe it's cooking. Maybe it's photography. Maybe it's playing the guitar. Maybe it's another language. Whatever your answer is, tell me why. Notice something? You're already having a conversation. Not because your English is perfect, but because you're expressing ideas. And that's what communication really is. Now let's switch roles. Imagine you're asking me questions. What would you ask? Maybe, what's your favorite country you visited? Or, how did you learn English? Or, what's your favorite book? Great. You've just learned another secret. Interesting conversations aren't created by perfect speakers. They're created by interesting questions. Now here's an exercise that can completely transform your confidence. It's called the 5 Why Challenge. Suppose someone tells you, I love traveling. Instead of changing the subject, ask, why? They answer, because I enjoy meeting new people. You ask, why do you enjoy that? They answer, because every culture teaches me something. Again, really? Like what? Suddenly, a simple statement becomes a 10-minute conversation. People love talking about the reasons behind their opinions, not just the opinions themselves. Let's try another example. Someone says, I enjoy reading. Don't stop there. Ask, what kind of books? What was the last book you read? What did you like about it? Would you recommend it? One answer creates 4 more questions. That's how conversations stay alive. Now I want to tell you about something called conversation energy. Have you ever spoken to someone who answers every question with one word? Yes. No. Maybe. Fine. How does that conversation feel? Heavy. Difficult. Now imagine someone answers like this. Yes. I actually tried that last weekend, and it was much more fun than I expected. Which conversation would you rather continue? Exactly. Energy is contagious. If you sound interested, people become interested. If you sound excited, people become excited. That doesn't mean you should pretend. It simply means you shouldn't hide your enthusiasm. If you genuinely love movies, talk about movies with energy. If you enjoy football, let people hear that excitement in your voice. Your energy matters just as much as your English. Now let's imagine another real situation. You're at a birthday party. Someone introduces you to a new person. This is Sarah. You shake hands. Now what? Many learners panic. Instead, use something you already know. Hi Sarah, nice to meet you. How do you know the birthday person? Simple. Natural. Easy to answer. Sarah replies. We've been friends since college. Now you ask. Oh really? What did you study? Can you see it? One answer naturally creates another question. You don't need to memorize hundreds of conversation starters. You only need to listen carefully to the last thing the other person said. That last sentence almost always contains your next question. Here's another powerful technique. It's called echoing. Suppose someone says, I just came back from Australia. Instead of immediately asking a completely different question, repeat the key word. Australia. I've always wanted to visit there. What was your favorite city? That repeated word gives your brain time to think. And it shows the other person you're listening. Professional interviewers use this technique all the time. So do great conversationalists. Now let's talk about confidence. Many people believe confidence comes before conversation. It doesn't. Confidence comes after hundreds of conversations. Think about your first day riding a bicycle. Were you confident? No. You became confident because you kept riding. The same thing happens with English. You don't wait to become confident before speaking. You speak, and confidence follows. That's why every conversation matters. Even the short ones. Even the awkward ones. Even the conversations where you make mistakes. Especially those conversations. Because every mistake teaches your brain something valuable. Every question you answer makes the next answer easier. Every new person you talk to makes the next conversation feel less frightening. Progress doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives one conversation at a time. Now imagine yourself 6 months from now. You're traveling abroad. You walk into a cafe. The person behind the counter smiles. Good morning. How are you today? Without thinking, you smile back. I'm doing great, thanks. How about you? The conversation continues. You order confidently. You ask about a local dessert. You thank them. You leave with a smile. A few years ago, that conversation might have felt impossible. Now, it feels normal. That's what fluency looks like. Not giving speeches. Living your life in English. Ordering food. Making friends. Sharing stories. Laughing at jokes. Helping someone. Asking questions. Understanding answers. Feeling comfortable. And it all begins with one simple conversation. So here's your challenge. Today. Before you go to bed, start one conversation in English. It could be with a friend, a classmate, a coworker, an online language partner, or even with yourself in front of a mirror. Your goal isn't to speak for an hour. Your goal is simply to begin. Because every confident English speaker was once someone who was nervous to say hello. The only reason they're fluent today is because they kept saying it. So don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait until you know every grammar rule. Don't wait until your vocabulary feels big enough. Start now. One question. One answer. One smile. One conversation. Because one conversation can change everything. And before you know it, English won't feel like a language you're learning. It will feel like a language you're living. I'll see you in the next lesson. Until then, stay curious, keep asking questions, keep sharing your story, and never stop speaking English.